Cumberland traffic, tow 4041 uniform, departing 11 right inbound.
Feeling of having wings on your back is often stated by pilots. You are now the controlling force of that glider. It's not that you're manipulating a stick or you're manipulating a handle. You're manipulating your entire body to control the glider. Moving your whole body gives you such a unique, direct feel to the wing.
This is Soaring the Sky, a glider pilot's podcast, coming to you from the Mid-Atlantic region here in the United States and bringing you great soaring content from glider pilots all over the globe. We now join Chuck and our guest pilot.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm so happy to be here with you for another super exciting episode. Now, today we'll be jumping out of the cockpit of the sailplane and stretching out under the wings to experience soaring in a whole different way. Our producer, Mitch Thompson, is going to be catching up with sailplane pilot and hang glider pilot Ian Brubaker. Mitch will find out why Ian chooses to spend most of his soaring time under the wings of a hang glider and not only catching thermals, but Ian is doing some aerobatics as well. Now, Ian has been a pilot since 2006, so he has a lot of adventures and stories to share with us. And don't go anywhere after we hear his story, because we have another great segment from the Soaring Master. Now, Sergio is going to share with us 5 ways we can improve our soaring. But right now, let's join Mitch and Ian on Soaring the Sky.
Hey, Ian. Welcome to the Soaring the Sky podcast.
Mitch, thanks for having me.
Right on. Yeah, glad you could take the time. It's been a few months since we bumped into each other at the Soaring Academy. Glad we finally found a slice of time to hook it up, and really looking forward to it.
Likewise.
And where we usually start is maybe just have you give us a short intro on yourself and a little flyover on your aviation journey these last years, and then we just go from there.
Well, my aviation journey started quite a while ago. 11 and a half years old, I was doing summer camps right across the street from an airport, and Torrance Airport actually, watching planes and helicopters take off and land every day. Well, every day I was at camp. So I was pretty enthralled by the idea of flying, and also not being super competitive in sports and not really enjoying other kind of sports as much. I was really drawn to it. So I started taking lessons in Cessnas first, and eventually worked over towards sailplanes because my father is a sailplane pilot, and really wanted me to kind of branch out as soon as possible to different types of aviation and really get a rounded experience of flying.
And Torrance, for our international listeners, that's in the Los Angeles, sort of the greater Los Angeles area.
Yeah, and it's right in the suburbs too. So if you want to go anywhere, you better be ready to encounter some Class Bravo. You're kind of stuck in that area.
Yeah, so your radio work probably developed early.
I haven't had trouble with radio communication since. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, very, very busy, very, very busy airspace down there.
So it wasn't until I was 18 that I started hang gliding, not because of any hesitations on my parents' side, thankfully, but just because that's when I kind of discovered it. In fact, it was at Crystal Air that I saw hang glider pilots doing a cross country from Sylmar, which was maybe about from Santa Clarita roughly over to Crystal Air. So about maybe 50 miles, 40 miles. Wasn't a spectacular distance, but considering the logistics of going over the backside of the mountains into some more rugged terrain, makes that a challenging cross country. So I watched them land at Crystal Air, pack up in 15, 20 minutes after their driver showed up and disappear. And I was stuck putting away this giant sailplane. I said, wait a minute, I got gypped.
So from Sylmar out to the Soaring Academy at Crystal, I would imagine that was, where it's like a prevailing west wind and is mostly a tailwind, and they just go up it's kind of the foothills there to Crystal? Is that kind of how it
They
works?
do, but back over in the Agua Dulce area, there's not a whole lot of land out areas. And also it's still far, it's not quite inland enough to be completely isolated from the marine layer. So a lot of times over at Silmar, they will have soaring days that are particularly good because the marine layer kind of backs off and you'll get lift up to 12,000 feet right over there on the local mountains. So it doesn't happen too often, but when it does, that's when you can do some really good cross countries out of there.
I'm going to imagine this is what, sort of July, August, September, when, cross country out to Crystal is doable.
It's pretty much the same seasons as sailplane flying.
Yeah.
The window that you get that lift and inversion, or the disappearance of the marine layer, seems to happen closer to October. So, and that's when we always make a trip out to Big Sur. So every time we go out to Big Sur, somebody says, "Hey, it's going to be 12 grand at Silmar tomorrow." And we all groan and say, "Well, at least it's pretty up here."
Right. Do you fly powered anymore, or just not really?
Once in a while. I try to keep current, but my interests and situation as far as locality to airports, familiarity with instructors and so on, and it's just a lot cheaper. And I get my flying fill, my kind of satisfaction of flying from hang gliding now that, I do the powered flying to keep current, but it's not quite a need for me spiritually.
And you're still living in Southern California, or?
I live up in Salt Lake City now.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I'd imagine lots of good, soaring and flying options up there.
Yeah. And we have a pretty good season too. So pretty much even through the winter, as long as it's not snowing, we get some kind of flying conditions just from the prevailing winds that we get out here.
Cool. Yeah, so back to sailplanes for a couple minutes. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your background there, and maybe a sort of a highlight or two from your sailplane days.
Sure. My sailplane memories are probably some of the fondest that I have, mostly because I think I did the most growing as a pilot, maturing as a pilot during that time. As you know, 14-year-olds can get solo certificates well before they're actually able to get a license. And I was eager to get out and build the hours and really get the experience of flying on my own and enjoying that kind of solitude and decision making. So I tried to branch out there as much as I could, and that's when it took a priority over powered flying because I could go solo. It was much more fun, and it was a great community out there too. I'm forever indebted to the folks over at the Soaring Academy for making it such a welcoming environment and an understanding one too, because since I had so much training and I had instructors like Dale Masters right from the start, I was taught, a lot of techniques and, full spoiler approaches, aggressive slips to landings. So it was something that I really latched onto, some more of the radical flying, and enjoyed a lot.
Dale's pretty amazing guy. Energy management and kind of the Yoda of the skies. When were you first out there? Like what year was that roughly?
Oh, you're making me do math on the spot. That's not fair. But it's been about.
Was this when Chris and Julie were running the place, or?
I'm not sure of the exact timeline, because I know that when I first went out there, I did this at about 12. It was still under the control of Fred Robinson. And then I think there was the change of ownership, and I took a little hiatus then just because the situation was getting a little strange there, some conflicts of personality, and we just took a little break and then came back, and Chris had taken over at that point and was really starting to make it into a full-fledged school. So that's when I went back and got my solo certificate and had a couple of different planes to fly. And one of them I really loved to fly was the Pilatus B4, which is an all aluminum aerobatic sailplane. And I never did serious aerobatics in it. Some wing overs, I think the proper term for it is clove hitch, where you kind of just bury the rudder, bury the stick into the corner, and you do a nice big quick wing over. So that was really fun. And then just being able to play around in the mountains and just having that fine control of the glider was something that I really appreciated and more suited my flying style, because I was always a little nervous about going further out. And Dale had always instilled on me, where he would point out the ground. He says, "That looks landable, doesn't it?" I say, "Yeah, it does." He says, "You'd get really hurt if you landed there, because there's so many rocks you can't see. And there's so much variation in that dirt down there that you'd be hard pressed to find a good land out area anywhere in this Mojave Desert unless you went out to El Mirage or landed on the highway."
That's so true. There's, whether there's, Joshua trees or, just a lot of undulations, and it might look good from, 1,000 feet, but the desert is pretty, it's pretty unforgiving around there. So you definitely do have to, kind of pick your spots. And El Mirage is that's a little bit of a haul, especially if you're getting, low in the mountains. And so, but it's where I started to learn as well. And it's just such a cool place, because, you're like a 7-minute tow to, 9,000 foot peaks. And you've got the desert, the high desert on one wing. And then you've got, kind of Los Angeles basin on the other, and lots of different lift, to play with. Probably the only thing that Crystal doesn't have is ridge lift, unless you're up on the top of, the San Gabriels in certain conditions. But
it does.
But, everything else.
It does have ridge lift, but it's expensive ridge lift.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like a, it's a high tow to get up there.
Yeah.
Wings and Wheels has been serving the soaring and sport aviation community for over 30 years. They hands down have the largest and most comprehensive inventory of sailplane and soaring supplies in North America, and they ship globally. Nearly everything you'll find on their site is in stock and ready for same-day shipping. Wings and Wheels is the exclusive American representative for HPH sailplanes. Be sure to check out the Twin Shark, their latest launch. They are also now the exclusive distributor in North America for the new Just Soaring Glider Sim Pro. The team has thousands of hours of flying experience in gliders and airplanes, staffed by Adam, Kelly, Julie, and Sean. A friendly voice will answer when you call or email them. Check them out at wingsandwheels.com.
Let's segue over to the hang gliders, and maybe you could kind of talk the listeners through, and like for me to prep for this interview, I actually had to do quite a bit of learning. It really just wasn't, very familiar with it. So, the hardware and, aerodynamics and how you control them in flight. There's obviously some very fundamental differences with sailplanes. Yeah. Just talk us through some of the basics on hang gliders. I think would be interesting.
Sure. Well, hang gliders are essentially weight shift controlled aircraft, and every aircraft is weight shift controlled to a degree. I mean, we all have to deal with weight imbalances on regular aircraft for a reason. You put too much weight in the tail and you're not going to be able to put the nose down, regardless of how hard you try. So the scale of hang gliders is a lot different in the sense that just our body weight being moved into different locations, either left, right, or pulling ourselves forward in front of the glider's center of gravity or aft, will allow us to bank or change the pitch of the glider. And that's essentially the controls of it. We're really only down to 2 axes there, because the yaw, although there are some tricks you can use to get some kind of yaw out of the glider, it's pretty much non-existent because of the nature of the glider. And for simplicity's sake too, which is really the key characteristics of hang gliders. One of the more interesting engineering problems of simplicity, weight, and cost. It's amazing to see the craftsmanship and the ideas that have gone into some of these hang gliders throughout the years, and how they've all kind of settled down to a relatively standard design, which is a delta wing shaped wing with ribs or battens, aluminum or carbon battens that give it its wing shape, and a dive recovery system to basically keep the glider from encountering a tumble. Of course, also some performance aspects or some performance upgrades to them, such as a variable geometry, which can get into later. But they've evolved in such a way that they are as simple as they are as necessary, because we always want that nice thing on the glider. But there's that distinction between hang gliders and rigid wings, which are essentially hang gliders with D cells, carbon D cells, and they have no flex, and all the controls are operated by spoilerons. And it'd be really nice to have some spoilerons on a hang glider, but then you got that much more complexity. You got 5 more minutes of setup time. You got another 10, maybe 5 pounds of weight that people just aren't going to want to carry. So it's a really interesting progression to see the gliders and how they are managing to get such great performance out of them, relatively speaking. It's kind of hard to talk about performance with, comparing hang gliders to sailplanes. I mean, they're just two absolutely different leagues.
Is it just kind of variations on a theme, or have there just been like major breakthroughs, or it's just sort of optimizing, things on the edges over the last decade?
I would say there have been some major breakthroughs in probably before the turn of the century. The biggest one, and this was done relatively early on, actually was what we call the floating crossbar. So essentially, you've got two leading edges that are pushing the wings apart. And what is keeping them apart is another cross member between the two leading edges. And since there is a nose angle, or the wings are swept back, you can kind of make like a really wide A out of that. You can imagine something like that. And the bar going across that A is what we call the crossbar. Now that has some ability to float or to shift left and right. So one of the leading edges can actually be further out or retracted somewhat. So there's some flex relative to the keel, which goes transverse to the direction of motion, or is parallel with the direction of motion roughly. So that allows the sail to flex and warp, similar to like the Wright Flyer. And it allows the glider to be much more maneuverable than just moving your weight over and waiting for gravity to do the work.
Right.
That's probably one of the major milestones of hang glider manufacturing. And I'm sure I know there are people that are much better experts on this subject. But I think that in conjunction with having a reliable dive recovery system, especially as the gliders got more and more robust and moving from 60-61 aluminum to 70-75 aluminum, just those are smaller iterations. And I think hang gliders have gone through a lot of that because it's a lot of trial and error. And not all these manufacturers have a team of full-fledged engineers on them. And now they mostly do, but especially back then, it was a lot of trial and error by people that just had a great idea.
Well, maybe you could touch on the dive recovery piece a little bit. What does that sort of look like, or how does that work?
So if you can imagine a stall in a regular airplane, the only reason why the aircraft does not continue to rotate over is because you have a horizontal stabilizer in the rear that's providing some resisting force when the aircraft tries to rotate about the wings when you're stalling the aircraft. And for a hang glider, because we don't have that, if we get ourselves into an aggressive enough stall where the inertia of the glider rotating, trying to recover, overcomes the aerodynamic forces that our wing, without a tail, is exerting to try and resist that rotation, it will continue to tumble. And that's when gliders start to break. So they've implemented dive recovery systems to lift the trailing edge up in the event that the wind is trying to push the trailing edge down. It's trying to essentially flatten the wing.
When you say a system, is that from a pilot input, or it's just built into the?
It's automatic.
It's just built into the design of the wing.
Right. It's built into the design, and there's two ways that they essentially do it. One is with upper rigging and some lines that actually go to the trailing edge with some really thin steel wire. Or they can have tubes going out from the leading edge, and it essentially is exerting a torquing action on the leading edge. So you have to have a leading edge that's fairly stiff so that it doesn't break when it gets torqued.
And so just from a pilot sensory perception side, what's the visceral kind of feel, between, say, a sailplane and a hang glider? I know there's some obvious stuff that comes to mind, but you've flown, both for quite a while. Maybe just talk us through that for a couple minutes.
So the sense of flying hang gliders is probably one of the most distinguishable forms or features of flying a hang glider. The feeling of having wings on your back is often stated by pilots. And because we're flying in a prone position, that really relates to that feeling of having wings on your back. But it's also that you are now the controlling force of that glider. It's not that you're manipulating a stick or you're manipulating a handle. You're manipulating your entire body to control the glider. So if you move forward or left or right, moving your whole body to control the hang glider gives you such a unique direct feel to the wing. To me, it's kind of an enchanting feeling where you're so in tune with your wing that you don't feel like a separate, like you're flying a glider. You feel very much a part of the glider.
Yeah, I guess, and for people that haven't experienced that, it's probably pretty damn hard to visualize or imagine what it's like until you've actually done it, right?
Yeah, and it's not quite like, at least, actually, I take that back. Equestrians, people that ride horses, actually comment that hang gliding feels very similar to riding a horse, where you feel that you have that same sense of connection.
It's sort of the horse whisperer, but it's your wing you're whispering to, and it's probably whispering back at you.
It is, and yeah, that brings up an interesting topic, but I'll hold on to it because I think we got more to come.
Okay, how about talk a little bit about launch options for hang gliders? Kind of looking around briefly, I've seen a whole bunch of different ways to get up in the air, but maybe give us a little flyover on that.
Sure. Essentially, there's two ways to get into the air. One is by foot launching, or the other is by being propelled in the air. And you can launch into the air with a ground-based winch, as sailplanes do. You could be launched via arrow towing behind another ultralight, something also that sailplanes commonly do. Another interesting form of getting aloft via towing is what we call truck towing. And that's where the glider is mounted onto a truck bed that has a winch attached to it. And they gain the initial airspeed by driving down a road, and the hang glider releases. The glider immediately gains altitude because of all that stored energy, converts the airspeed into altitude, and then it basically works as a payout winch where they apply some pressure to the drum and allow a certain amount of line to reel out as the glider climbs. So
That's so. What kind of get off altitude would you be looking at? Have you done that yourself? And like what kind of get off altitude is typical in that sort of truck bed
I
scenario?
haven't had too much experience with winch or truck towing. Most of my experience comes from aero towing and foot launching, but I can imagine that you, depending on how much rope you have and how long your road is, you could certainly average 2,000 feet, perhaps more. If
Oh, whoa. That's a lot higher than I was gonna get. I was gonna guess, 500, 750 or something like that. That's
maybe
yeah, that's certainly
maybe I'm exaggerating and I'm showing my weakness in that I haven't real or lack of experience in winch towing, but
But I mean, on a good day, I mean, there's days at Crystal you could, CFI does a premature, release or whatever, and then finds a thermal at 400 feet, and they end up at Mount Baden, almost 10,000 feet. So,
yeah.
I would imagine, so that's interesting. Mostly, you're just sort of foot launching off of just sort of like a cliff side or like a downslope on a, like a steep hill.
Yeah, essentially we look for steep hills, and cliff launching can certainly be done, although the difficulty factor and difficulty factor goes up, margin of safety goes down. You're basically looking for a sweet spot in between a surface that's too shallow that you can, you run out of energy or you run out of stride before the glider takes off, and sheer cliff, which, like I said, is doable, but also requires special attention and training. So generally, we try to find just gradually sloping hills where we can slowly accelerate into the air, maintain control, slowly allow the glider to become loaded, use our weight shift to control the glider, and fly away from the hill. A lot of people think of us as jumping off of a hill, which is not the case. We're flying away from the hill.
And I imagine you're always flying into a headwind, or at least a good quartering headwind or something.
Yeah, the nice thing about hang gliders is you can imagine them like a truly scaled down B-52, where our bodies are that rotating main wheel, and we can allow the glider to point whatever direction it needs to. So while there are safety concerns as far as crosswinds go from mechanical turbulence, as long as we recognize that and know that it's not going to be a factor, or perhaps try and give some safety margin to that, we can launch in 90-degree crosswinds, no problem.
That's interesting. Okay. And just kind of jumping around here, for somebody that got interested in this and was, just kind of adjacently curious on what the cost of entry is, what are the sort of price ranges for somebody that's looking to get a, reasonably, modern sort of performance hang glider wing?
For a beginner glider, you're looking somewhere around $4,000. And
oh, wow.
That's not including the harness, which can range anywhere. It's for a new harness, you're looking at roughly $1,000. A reserve parachute, which is maybe $800 to $1,000. Prices are in such flux now that it's hard to give a straight answer, but roughly about $1,000. And then a helmet, which probably a couple hundred, depending on which kind you
And the
go
helmet's
with.
what, to mitigate against crashing into the aluminum on the glider, or is that for like ground, like landing kind of?
It comes into play when you potentially and hopefully don't hit the ground.
Got it.
Aerox, the #1 in portable and engineered aviation oxygen systems, your source for FAA-approved oxygen masks and portable oxygen systems, and now introducing the Aerox Pro 2 Plus Flight Bag portable oxygen system. Small, lightweight, and simple to use, the Pro 2 Plus is perfect for the occasional user who wants the flexibility to access higher altitudes without worry about flying impaired. Now available at Aerox distributors and at Aerox.com. So remember, our friends at Aerox, engineered for aviators.
And yeah, speaking of harnesses, I know in the pre-interview we touched on that a little bit, but maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the harnesses and what the different types are, and just kind of a little bit of an introductory piece on the tech. Sure. There.
Hang gliding harnesses boil down to two categories that I see. One is an open back design, and the other is a closed or pod design. So the open back we generally refer to as cocoons or stirrup or knee hanger, something that is cradling your body, but it's not fully encapsulating it. So that is a really convenient, lightweight style harness that is great for beginners or recreation pilots, but you need a number of suspension points in order to make it comfortable. So they generally go hand in hand with more drag. Whereas the closed back designs, they are actually able to put support hardware, either metal tubes or carbon fiber plates, to spread out the area in which your body is supported so it's not getting pinched, so to speak, almost like somebody squeezing you. So it spreads that area out for the support of the body. And then, because depending on how strong you make that support system, you can have as little as a single suspension point. So it's a lot more efficient in terms of aerodynamics.
Okay. You're involved in, I think we chatted, but you're involved in a manufacturing business doing harnesses. Is that right?
Yeah. We're refining some of the harnesses that we acquired from a company called High Energy Sports. And they decided to change courses with their business model, and we were really sad to see them go. So me and my business partner, Rob Cooper, approached them and said, hey, why don't we continue it on? So we realized that there's quite a bit of updating to do. So right now we're in the process of updating those designs.
And those are fabricated in the US here?
Yeah, we make them here in Draper, Utah.
Cool. Well, that sounds that sounds kind of exciting and cool that you can tie in your passion with picking up a piece of business that sounds like that's important to the community.
Absolutely. And having US support, I think, is also really important, because especially for harnesses, a lot of these are made overseas, particularly in Brazil. There's a very well-known hang glider harness manufacturer down there called Rotor that makes absolutely fantastic harnesses, but they only have one US distributor. So sometimes support can be a challenge, and we're trying to do our best to fill that gap.
Cool. As I was watching videos, I just got kind of curious about, if a sailplane's landing in a stiff crosswind, we just put in a bunch of rudder and crab the thing onto the runway, but without that vertical control surface, are you guys just always you're basically just forced to kind of turn straight into the wind when you're landing, or how does that work, the landing business, where you've got a line kind of picked out but the wind's not really cooperating with you? How does that go?
Well, the nice thing about hang gliders is that their space that is required to land is much smaller than that of a sailplane or even a small Cessna or powered aircraft. But we're also able to handle a lot more rugged terrain.
What are we talking, like, what, 200-300 feet kind of thing?
It could be it could be shorter than that. Maybe a typical landing would be maybe 100 feet or less. It depends on how much energy you carry through on your round out, but I would say on average I would say it's less than 100 feet.
And so you basically are just turning into the wind versus trying to manipulate the wing on some kind of a line or whatever.
If we have the luxury of doing that, then yes. But often I try to get people to think more about the terrain that they're landing on, because sometimes we have limitations as far as the terrain features. Say that's maybe if you were to go into the wind, you'd be landing on some pretty rugged boulders, or maybe there's a cactus field over there, where just a 10-degree crosswind would have avoided that completely. And like I was said before, that we were there's the scaled down B-52 where we're able to run in the direction of travel while allowing our glider's nose to point into the relative wind. And not allow, but we don't really have a choice in the matter. So we can crab the glider such that we can land on the best area of land available, up to 90 degrees. And that was actually part of my training for hang gliders, which is to land 90 degrees to the wind. And there is a lot of running involved. There are also advanced techniques and flaring and crosswinds too, to try and dissipate as much energy as possible before landing.
And so sticking with the wind theme for a minute, and let's just pick an easy example. So you're just kind of straight into a headwind. And I know that paragliders are, pretty limited in terms of their penetration, but at what point, what's sort of the max headwind that you can, safely, kind of penetrate through and get down before you're just actually getting blown, almost backward?
It depends a lot on the performance of the hang glider and the wing loading. To give you an example, for my training glider, single surface, nice draggy, floaty glider, with me on it, I probably would stop having fun at about 28 to 30 miles an hour. And on my high performance wing, I'd probably start getting pushed backwards closer about 35, maybe even more, 38, I would say at most. And we do have a lot more pitch control than paragliders. Even if we're having a difficult time penetrating, we can still come down and we can force the glider to just dive and become so inefficient because of the increase in airspeed creates so much more parasitic drag that we're able to get down more comfortably.
And all things equal, a comfortable landing is, calm, or it just, you'd rather just land in a, like a 10 knot headwind?
It depends a lot on the areas that you're flying, time of day, weather conditions. Ideally, landing into a nice 5-10 knot headwind would be ideal. And you don't always get that. So what we do is, if you can imagine a regular airplane landing, it's got a pretty good rollout before it actually applies enough brakes to come to a full stop. Now, we're not running through that whole round out most of the times. We try to slow the glider down enough that we can get a manageable run in and then slow the glider down. Or we can, with precise timing, push the glider's nose out very abruptly to create a very clean stall and expose the broad side of the wing to the relative wind to slow us down quickly, which is what we call a flare. So not a flare as, you're coming down and you pull back on the stick to keep from hitting the runway. Is that it's not that kind of flare. We have a little different term. The flare is a movement, or is a technique for us to come to a full stop quickly.
Right. It's like you're pitching that bar forward at the end and, to get yourself down, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like a high speed stall.
Yeah. Okay. And sort of moving on, maybe kind of take us through your hang glider, flying journey, where you started, what kind of stuff you're doing now, and what goals or, kind of reach stuff you have in mind for the next couple years of Ian and hang gliders.
Okay. I started my training back in 2013, roughly, with Wind Sports Hang Gliding out in Sylmar, California, and they have a fantastic beach training site just south of LAX at Dockweiler Beach. So I had the real privilege of being able to learn there with some very wise, knowledgeable, experienced masters of hang gliding. So that's where my training started. And having an aviation background, and especially soaring background, I picked it up relatively quickly. But funny enough, I would say for every hour that I spent flying off the mountain, I spent 10 at the beach, just hammering in fundamentals, having fun, doing little spot landing contests, trying different styles or grip positions for takeoff, talking about different ways of flying, or reviewing a video with my instructor that was down there, and really just having a good time at it, and having that same kind of feeling like I'm really learning the fundamentals, and the sky's the limit from here. So after that, I got my what we call a Hang 3 rating, which is essentially your solo or it's basically your pilot's license. A Hang 2, which is the ratings go 1 through 4. The 2 is kind of a solo rating, a provisional rating where you're good to start exploring more, but not quite to fully leave the nest. And I achieved just barely from accomplishing the hours requirements, my Hang 3, before I moved to college to Arizona. So from there, it was a little bit more sparse flying. One, because I was certainly busy, but two, it was a new flying site, which was, instead of launching at 3,800 feet or 3,400 feet, which is the top of Kegel Mountain in Sylmar, you're now launching from 7,800 feet and landing at 5,000 feet. So the site was intimidating, and it was also a lot more logistically complicated. And hang gliding in Arizona did not have as big of a community, at least that I got involved into. And it was more difficult because I had to beg friends to drive my car down, 40 minutes after watching me take off a mountain. So that was where I felt like my progression in hang gliding was the most challenging. After that, I took a job out in Ogden, Utah, and started flying at Point of the Mountain, which is a very famous ridge soaring site, and consistent, smooth, and local. So for me, it was about an hour drive, and I started flying quite often. So after I left BAE, I came back up here to start teaching hang gliding with a new school called Wasatch Hang Gliding, and I still teach with them today. And having the flexibility, Wasatch Hang Gliding.
Oh yeah, okay. I think I follow you guys on Instagram.
Cool. So after that, I was able to start flying more regularly, and having moved closer to Point of the Mountain, I was only about 15 minutes away now. And that's where I really felt like I progressed and got my Hang 4. I had my Hang 4 rating for a while, but I felt like I really made that leap in progression flying at Point of the Mountain and flying in Utah during the last 3 years. And that's also when I started becoming more interested in doing aerobatics, which is quite a taboo thing for the hang gliding world. As gliders got more high performance, they were able to push the speed limits so much more easily, and therefore the G loading could easily be past the glider's limitations. And there have been a number of accidents for aerobatics in hang gliding. And there's just been the stigma of it's just too much risk to even be thinking about it. It's just not worth it. We already enjoy this so much, and we already can do so many cool things with a hang glider. Why would you want to put yourself in that much risk? At least that's the way that I was.
Well, what kind of maneuvers
brought up with hang gliding?
Do you guys? I mean, it's funny. I was just out a couple weeks ago, in speaking of Arizona, I was out doing sailplane aerobatics in a Fox, and of course you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But what are the sort of the typical aerobatic maneuvers in a hang glider's wheelhouse?
Basically, you've got loops, which is just going straight over the top, upside down. Wing overs, where you're getting the glider maybe 100 degrees over in a bank. It's because we don't have a rudder. They, depending on how you execute them, they almost look sometimes more like hammerheads. And climb overs, which are essentially not full-fledged loops, but you're getting to the point where you're maybe 160 degrees bank and you're kind of in a roll going almost all the way upside down, or passing 180 but not going straight up over the top. So it's essentially the combination of those three. I've heard and seen some other maneuvers like tail slides, which can be very risky in hang gliders.
Our longtime sponsor of the show, the Soaring Academy, is engaged in nonprofit outreach work with local area veterans and also with young people for the STEM programs at their top-notch gliderport facility just outside of Los Angeles, nestled near the north side of the San Gabriel Mountains. They also have a fantastic flight school and are continuing to turn out great glider pilots every month. If you like to donate to their nonprofit initiatives or learn more about their flight school, go to soaringacademy.org or check them out on Instagram at Soaring Academy.
I imagine you're not doing any inverted or anything like that.
I have heard in some of the older pilots, they would actually get their gliders inverted, let their feet fall down onto the glider's keel and ride it like a surfboard. I haven't seen that done personally, and it sounds absolutely crazy to me, but it also sounds kind of cool. So,
all right, I'll be looking for your, Instagram, posts on. No, just kidding. I got to keep it safe. But and so, what's kind of in your kind of goals roadmap for the next couple years with hang gliders?
I would say progressing a consistent training curriculum and getting it out there to more people. I think, at least in my opinion, the sport is at a point where I think we just need more information out there. It's kind of been too word of mouth for so long. Oh, I learned this from my instructor. I do it like this because my instructor did it. We've kind of gotten in this rut, and it makes training slower, and it makes students frustrated because they see so many different things, or they're told so many different things by so many different people, but they're never really given a good reason, or they're frustrated that one person demands technique A when you were taught technique B for the last 3 years. And it's like sorry, if you can't do it this way, then I don't really want to teach you. So
interesting.
It's a challenge. So, and then also progressing with hang gliding and stunt flying more, doing some more filming, and finally starting to get a little bit more into the competition world, doing some longer cross countries. So
cool. Maybe next step here, you could spend a few minutes talking to listeners about what crossover, kind of cross-pollination you see between hang gliding, GA, or sailplanes, and why people might be more interested than they think they might be with what's, widely, I think, perceived as a pretty dangerous sport.
Well, as far as the stigma of having it be a dangerous sport, that is a remnant from the early 70s when people were starting to build their own hang gliders and having structural failures because of poor engineering. There was, I think, one year there was like 68 deaths in hang gliding.
And by the way, I have two uncles, I think, that were avid hang glider pilots in the early 70s, and yeah, a lot of trips to the ER room, but probably case in point on that
Right.
historical reference.
And that is certainly not the case anymore. There is a risk factor still associated with it, but as much as I just talked about training and how I think it should be a little bit more, have some more information out there, it's miles better than what we had in the 70s. Most people took 2 lessons and, you're on your own. Now we're up to, 12 to 15 on average, and with much more rigor and much safer equipment, more docile handling equipment, easier to launch, easier to land. So it's quite safe.
Well, I mean, that's even like sailplane kind of back in the day. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to hear of, people doing, 5, 10, kind of dual flights and going out and soloing. And I don't think that's really the case anymore. It's probably more like 25, 30, 35 flights or something, and just a lot more, instruction going on.
And as far as cross-pollination, I can only speak from my experience. When I saw hang gliding, I said, I love the sport of soaring. I love getting out there and really earning my flight. But I hated driving an hour and a half one way without traffic to go fly a sailplane. And the flexibility and adventure of being able to bring your hang glider anywhere you want. Now, we have common launch sites that people generally have found to be safe and fly out of most often, just like we would at an airport. But the portability, the expense of it was an attraction, but also kind of that excitement. I was a bit of a daredevil in the sailplane world, and I, in the hang gliding world, I was kind of the rigid, stuffy, come on, why don't you go over here and, push it a little bit more. So it kind of satisfied my sense of adventure while still making me feel that I was in control and safe enough to do this for a very long time. And indeed, I've known pilots that have done aerobatics for many, many years and have never thrown their reserve parachute. I know many hang glider pilots that started in the 70s and still are alive and doing well and have maybe broken a bone once or twice, but that's in a span of 40 years of flying a hang glider. And they're probably taking pretty risks.
How many people in the hang glider world, that are doing other, whether it's sailplanes or para or anything, or is it the vast majority are, just only doing hang gliding?
The vast majority are doing paragliding. It's no competition, unfortunately, but and because it's such a quick crossover between the two. The fundamentals, the people, and you still retain that kind of community. Where I know a lot of people that also fly sailplanes or ultralights, but it's not quite as much. And the type of people that tend to get interested in this sport range from many, many different areas, many different walks of life. And some people that I would say appreciate the little bit more laid back attitude that hang gliding has, where we have part 103 as far as FERs go, and the rest of it is focused on flying the glider properly and safety.
So it's kind of like a surfer versus a sailboat captain or something.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
A little bit more of a surfing vibe.
And I think and it certainly attracted me. I love flying, but I just don't like memorization of so many different rules. And I understand the reasoning for it, but it takes the fun away to me.
Well, so and you'd mentioned ultralights. So I know another thing we'd kind of touched on in the pre-interview. You wanted me to ask you about Part 103 and Ultralights. Maybe just touch on that for a minute.
I see Part 103 kind of in an awkward stage right now. I don't know if you saw the accident report, preliminary accident report of the mid-air collision in Texas, but it was with a powered paraglider, which is considered an ultralight, and a Cessna Caravan. And it was double fatality, and it was a very dramatic crash. So, this was the fear of pilots back in the 70s and 80s, was if they, had a midair with any other airplane, then that'd be it. We would just be regulated out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And that has not been the case yet. But I think it kind of shows the need for us to start picking up on how we can really mitigate that risk, especially when the skies are getting ever more crowded. I mean, drones are on the horizon too. And if we start flying at lower altitudes and in places that are more sparse, we're probably going to encounter more and more traffic as people start to push the boundaries of aviation in many different fields. So I think it's important for organizations and pilots and communities of pilots to start really doubling down on the technology that's out there. One thing that I'm starting to be a big advocate for is ADS-B in receivers that can link up to your smartphone, just so that we can have that awareness and technology, because it really is starting to get to the point where we have so much technology being implemented in aircraft. We have such a robust system of navigation for IFR, which, by the way, in that accident, the Cessna Caravan was on an IFR flight plan. So we have these structures that are in place to keep everybody safe, and we're kind of the rock in the middle of the road. I know that the FAA has no interest in regulating us, but there's an issue there that I see, where if we don't start picking up on these technologies, if we don't start becoming more aware of these issues, that it can come to bite us in the end.
What about even something as basic as radio comms? Because I know we were out over the mountains around Crystal back in August, and there was like 4 para guys that were just right at similar altitudes and stuff, and we were trying to raise these guys on radios. Do you guys typically use radios in flight, or not really?
We use 2-meter radios, which is on a completely different frequency. We're technically allowed to use airband, but that's also another piece of equipment that we need to bring around, which we can only use to report positions to other pilots and not really communicate with our buddy that's, flying at a gaggle with us.
Right. So
I really, thinking on it, I don't know of anybody that flies with an airband radio when they're flying a hang glider or a paraglider. I have not seen it yet. And I think that we should change that. But also, I think we need a little bit more of a green light and guidance from the FAA. And what are our limitations with this? At what point are we starting to break the line, as far as you're not using it for safety anymore, you're using it to chit chat, or you're just, communicating non-essential information, you're just cogging up the airways, because it really puts people off. The FAA is seen as this immovable wall, this really kind of thing in the ultralight community, where if the FAA is getting involved, you really screwed up. So we try to keep away from it as much as possible. And I think it's really hurt us. So I think there's some more research, some more conversations to be had with FAAs to try and figure out, hey, how can we best use this? Because I think it is important.
So kind of something we always try to touch on the pod here, safety related stuff. Maybe we could spend a couple minutes on what are sort of the top 2 or 3 hang glider kind of pilot mistakes that result in injuries or even worse. I think everybody listening knows kind of what scrapes, sailplanes can get into with, spins, getting slow in the pattern and all that kind of stuff. But, maybe you could spend a minute to chat about, what gets a hang glider pilot into a scrape.
Sure. Well, just as with all other forms of aviation, 90% of accidents are a result of pilot error. And it really comes down to a judgment issue and how much safety factor the pilot is giving themselves. Ultimately, the first safety decision comes down to, do I fly or do I stay on the ground? And sometimes that is the mistake that gets people, is they end up in a situation where they're flying in conditions that are way over their heads and they can't manage their way out of it. Luckily, I have not seen too much of that where people are flying in conditions that they shouldn't have. And even those, they usually scrape away with maybe a botched landing or getting into a field that they hadn't never landed in before because they got blown, downwind so far.
Just Soaring, the makers of the Glider Sim Pro Sailplane Simulator Cockpit, would like to congratulate German pilot Ben Fest for his recent victory in the first ever FAI-sanctioned aviation esports event in history, the Sailplane World Grand Prix, which Ben won after several days of exciting competition against some of the top Condor soaring pilots from around the world. If you are looking for a best-in-class dedicated sailplane simulator cockpit for Condor or Microsoft Flight Sim, look no further than the Just Soaring Glider Sim Pro. Check them out at justsoaring.com or at just.soaring on Instagram.
So, is it fair to say that most of the real kind of injury or worse than injuries stuff is on the landing side of the business? Or, like this, you said earlier, the structural failure type, overloading the wing, that's more a relic of the past, and it's mostly now just on sort of landing. Or I guess launch is a potential, a botched launch. If you could just kind of rank out that, kind of how that looks.
Yeah, you're correct that structural failures of hang gliders is pretty uncommon now. And most of what I have seen as far as structural failures is a improper pre-flight, and they didn't catch something during the assembly. The most common accidents I see, it is a bit hard to say which one I've seen more accidents with, takeoffs or landings, but I would say the most issues that I've seen people have are on landings, just because there are so many ways to land a hang glider, and it varies so much depending on the conditions that you're in. Where launching, like I said, there are more technical launches and unforgiving launches, such as sheer cliffs, can be quite demanding. But it's a little bit, I would say it's somewhat less common to see serious injuries on takeoffs. And unfortunately, what happens more on takeoffs are actually fatalities, because of the demanding launches. If you get into a situation where you're taking off in a very demanding area, say it's a kind of a slot in between trees and you got rocks and you've got, a cliff face, that you're putting yourself at so much more risk in that situation that the mistakes are less forgiving. I think there's probably more injuries on landing, because at that point you're probably have made it through enough of the flight to then go out into what you think is a relatively safe field, much better than a steep, a mountain cliff or mountain face.
And you'd mentioned before about a reserve chute or a chute or something. What is, what does that sort of look like, and when would that come into play, and how does that work?
So pretty much all hang glider pilots now fly with reserve parachutes, even when soaring small dunes, just because it's part of our equipment and it really never leaves our harness. So it's a hand deployed parachute where it's stored in a pouch attached to our harness, and you pull a handle that is, or
Mm-hmm.
to open a container that is Velcroed together, or pull a Velcroed handle
Mm-hmm.
that then opens up a folded layers of fabric that just pop out a parachute. And then you throw it away from the hang glider and it will deploy. So it's a little different than like a regular aircraft reserve parachute where it's got a spring loaded system and it actually punches the parachute out. You have to throw it.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, though, throwing a reserve in hang gliding is so uncommon that it's pretty much only those that either get into the leeward side of a mountain into severe rotor that require it, or those that have done failed aerobatics.
Okay. And, I know a thing that has, gotten the best of, sailplane pilots over the years is circling a little too close to cloud base, or, an overdeveloped cloud. Sailplane is whatever, 1,000 pounds plus with a pilot or something. And I would imagine you guys have to be a little more careful with your kind of spacing with cloud base. And how do you guys deal with, cloud sec? And I know when I've been flying sailplane, and paraglider guys were going nuts. There was, some pretty aggressive developing clouds and stuff. Maybe you could spend a minute talk about that.
So thankfully I have not been in a situation where I've gotten cloud suck. What was taught to me by my instructor was to go out on a calm day and dive your glider. So, pull in and point the nose down as much as you can and observe the rate of descent in smooth air. And if your rate of climb over a cloud, especially a, somewhat uncertain looking cloud, gets beyond a certain percentage of your maximum rate of descent, then you should immediately try and leave that thermal. Of course, it's comes down to a judgment factor. Going up 1,500 feet a minute in a thermal sounds fantastic, and realizing it too late could be real trouble. I've known people. I've heard of people getting cloud suck, and it actually destroyed their glider, and they had to come down under a parachute.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a serious thing, and also it's like, especially out here in Utah, we get gust fronts a lot. So thundercell just dumps a bunch of rain, and you've got a 30, 40 mile an hour gust of wind on the way.
Yeah,
that can be pretty dramatic. And just in general, the weather that we fly in is just it's another world if you think about it, because a 20 mile an hour wind may not be, it's probably a little bit concerning for a sailplane pilot. As a headwind, it's annoying, but it's not too bad. For a hang glider, where our stall speed is in the teens, that's over 100% of the airspeed at stall or trim. So we're dealing with scales that are much more profound than you would with any other type of aircraft. You have to respect the weather much more in a hang glider and spend probably more days not flying than you would most other aircraft.
Hey everybody, Chuck here. Please hit the pause button and either make a note for yourself to follow up, or just directly pop over to your social media or soaring forum of choice and help spread the word about this show to your friends or user groups that you know are interested in aviation or soaring. We invest a lot of our time into this show, and for no financial gain. We're doing this to help grow interest and participation in the sport of soaring around the world, and we can't do it without your help. Only a handful of you contribute via Patreon, but that's okay. You can help in other ways, like spreading the word about this podcast. Thank you for your support, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
We're sort of running a little over here, but I do have, sort of two last bits I wanted to touch on. So if you could just pick maybe one hang glider flight in, your sort of experience in these last years, what were the sort of highlights for you, and what made that special?
I would say probably every flight that I've done over at Big Sur in the coastal California has been much more than just special. It is a profound experience. And one of my first flights there, we had a Condor, California Condor, fly overhead, and I watched him take a thermal, and I launched and went to that same thermal, ended up having a 3-hour flight overlooking the entire coastline of California. Absolutely spectacular. And I would say the flights that we did doing the drone filming was kind of the highlight of my aerobatic career so far. That was such a fun and exciting form of flying, and really an adventure. And for me, getting to work with people in filming.
It's like an FPV drone with like an Oculus
Yes.
on the ground.
And then finally,
we did a couple months ago with like an FPV drone guy. It's like super cool. It's an entirely different visual perspective that's just only really become available to the aviation world in just the last few years.
And then lastly, my most in the cross country world, I recently did my first competition in Casa Grande, Arizona, and I officially had my longest flight to date there, which was I think 4 hours and 20, maybe 25 minutes. And man, being exhausted after that,
Nice.
but just having that sense of accomplishment and being in the lead gaggle with some of these expert pilots for the first third of the flight was really just a privilege.
So on cross country, and especially Arizona, I imagine it's more. Do you hydrate? Do you have a Camelback or?
Oh yeah, we carry water.
Are you taking a pee up there, sort of thing, or how does? I know cross country and a glider, hydration and get pee tubes and all these kind of things. How does that work in a hang glider?
It's essentially the same. Since the harnesses have the pod harnesses that you normally be racing with have a zipper going down the length of your body on the front, you can just unzip and relieve yourself. But and water, usually people carry maybe one of the medium-sized Camelbacks. You're kind of sipping because you don't want to take on too much weight. So a lot of pre-hydration is important.
Yep. All right, cool. So so how we kind of wrap up every show is give guest pilot a chance to give a shout out, recognize significant people, in their aviation journey, family, friends, instructors, competitors, whatever. So yeah, go.
Well, as you know, having started from such a young age, I'm indebted and privileged to have the parents that I do, and I love them very much for that. So, of course, first people that I shout out to, because I wouldn't be here without them. And as far as instructors, the most pivotal people in my instructing career have been Dale. One of them is Dale Masters, I would say, played a very significant role in my sailplane learning. For powered flying, Mickey Holton, who is teaching tail dragger instruction out of Torrance Airport with his Citabria, a real stick and rudder instructor. And in the hang gliding world, I owe all of my knowledge and fundamental training to a very special instructor, Greg DeWolf, who spent many, many hours with me at the beach and always kept things fun and interesting. And also Joe Greblow, who is still teaching occasionally. And he made hang gliding teaching into a science. It wasn't just this word of mouth. And he really is what has inspired me to become the instructor that I am today.
Fantastic. Well, Ian, this has been just a real pleasure and just fascinating interview. And I think for a lot of our listeners, this is all kind of new ground, new air for us to sort of soar through. And really appreciate you taking the time. And this has been it's a great pleasure to talk to you. And happy soaring, my man.
Happy soaring. It was really fun getting to share my experience. So lets me relive a lot of it, which there's so much joy in soaring.
All right. Well, thanks, Ian. And, we'll catch up with you on the other side of the rainbow.
Will do. See you guys there.
Hi there, Sergio from Soaring Master here. Everyone wants to become a better pilot. So I've prepared 5 tips to help everyone achieving this. The first step is to study meteorology for soaring. Top pilots have a great understanding of meteorology, learn how to analyze forecasts, compare different models, and work on your sky reading skills. And always practice identifying the energy lines when flying. The second tip is to analyze your flights. There are many softwares available for soaring analysis nowadays. Numerically analyze your flights in order to determine the percentage of time spent turning, your achieved cross-country speed, number of thermal tries, see how effective your cruising technique and thermal selection have been, and keep a track record of your achieved performance. The third tip is to keep a record of your lessons learned. After a training flight, take some time and write down the strong points and your weak points of the flight that has just ended. Don't let those lessons learned fade away in your memory. Write them down as soon as you get back home. The fourth tip is to commit yourself to continuous improvement. Read your gliding notes before every flight for you to remember what you did right and what you did wrong your past flight, and avoid repeating the same mistakes. You see how fast you're going to improve. And the last tip, there's no better training than flying. Keep a training schedule for both virtual flying and real flying. I wish you all great flights, guys. For more tips, follow me on Instagram at Soaring Master or check my website, soaringmaster.com.
Thank you, Sergio, for those great tips. Always enjoy what you have to share with us here on the pod. And thank you for hanging out with us here. We look forward to having you join us next time for another soaring adventure. And don't forget about that awesome recording tool we have told you about. We have there on our website. It makes it possible and super easy to leave your soaring story. We're always looking for good soaring content here on the podcast to share with our audience. And no worries, you can remain anonymous if you like. We just want to hear those flights you have had. Until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and happy soaring.
If you would like to say hi and let us know where you are enjoying the podcast, we would love to hear from you. If you are a glider pilot and want to share your aviation journey, contact us at chuck@soaringthesky.com or send us a message on our website at soaringthesky.com and Chuck will get in touch with you. We hope you join us next time for another soaring adventure here on Soaring the Sky, a Glider Pilots podcast. Soaring the Sky is written and produced by Chuck Fulton, co-producer Mitch Thompson. Original music for the podcast was written and produced by Kim Spangler. Graphic design for the podcast was created by Zachary Fulton. Voiceover work was done by Michelle Perez.